this video, I'm going to be going over the entire California residential purchase agreement with you so that you understand exactly what you're going to be signing, what terms and conditions you have to offer to the seller, and I'm going to show you different ways to help your offer stand out against the competition if you find yourself in a competitive situation. I'm also going to be pointing out all of the different protections that are built into this contract for you as a buyer, as well as ways to cancel the contract penalty-free. Okay, this is going to be a pretty lengthy video, but I'm going to make sure I timestamp all of the different sections so that it will be easier for you to reference along the way. And just a quick note, this is not going to be the final contract just yet. Okay, this is an offer and we still need the seller to accept their offer. So let's get to it. Are you ready? Are you excited? Before we get started, I think it's important for me to give you a little more context into the housing market that you're about to enter. Now, we're in one of the hottest, most competitive markets in the country. And I think understanding the factors that play into that and how we even got to that point is going to be important for you to understand as you go through this offer process and compete against these other buyers to win the home that you want. Now, this graph is going to be, I think, the best visual representation to give you an overall understanding of the general landscape that we're in. This dates back all the way to 2006, and it shows you inventory supply levels going back from then all the way to today. And you'll see that at the height of the housing crisis, we had up to 45,000 homes on the market, right? Today, we're sitting at a little under 10,000, and it's been that way for quite a while. Ever since you'll see 2013 in that graph is when inventory levels really started to shift. So that is the time in the Bay Area where the tech boom started to blossom. And that's why you're going to see that severe drop in inventory levels, as well as that rise in home prices, right? So this is simply a severe imbalance of supply and demand. Now, what are the factors that are playing into that besides more jobs and more income in the area? Well, along with increased home prices come increased rents. And those two factors alone become a magnet for investors to come in and take advantage of the opportunity in our market. So what you're going to find a lot of the times is that you will be competing not only against home buyers, but investors as well. And those investors have deep pockets, right? They are usually paying all cash for these homes with very, very quick closes, right? An all cash offer can close as soon as 5 days. Now, all cash offers also don't have a lot of the contingencies that financed offers have. So you're not going to deal with the loan contingency or the appraisal contingency with an all cash offer. And because we're in a full disclosure market where home sellers are providing inspection reports up front, as well as the other layer of that is that investors really don't care about the condition of the home, right? Oftentimes they're buying these homes sight unseen. So full disclosure or not, a lot of times they're just buying these homes without that inspection contingency to begin with, because they have a team of contractors who are going to come in and rehab that property already and then turn it into a rental income property and then offload it sometime in the future once they've had enough equity gain. So that is the sad, unfortunate part of this whole market, and it's happening across the country as well, is that investors are pricing out a lot of home buyers. Now, what does that mean for you as you are trying to figure out the offer that's going to win you this home? Well, just keep that in mind that chances are you're going to be competing against an investor. And because this has been happening for quite some time, as you can see in that graph, buyers have had to adjust to that competition by also waiving those same contingencies that an all cash offer would do, right? And so there are certain risks involved with that. And so understanding what that entails is going to be an important part of the process, okay? And just knowing how you can be more competitive in this market as well is going to help you. And this is what this video is for. I'm going to show you all of the terms and conditions that you can have in your contract to help strengthen your offer. And again, what those risks are and what protections you have as a buyer still. So let's get to it. So the first few forms are just going to be standard California disclosures. The first one being about agency relationships. So you should know that there are different agents involved in this transaction, and we have different duties to the parties involved. Firstly, all agents have a duty of honest and fair dealing to all parties. But more importantly, my duty to you as my client is that I have a fiduciary duty to you of utmost care, integrity, honesty, and loyalty. In other words, I'm here to represent your best interests at all times. And just know that the seller's agent is there to do the same for their client. So this form basically wants you to be aware that agents from my same office or brokerage may be representing the seller of the home that you want to purchase. There also may be instances where I'm working with buyers who are looking at the same homes as you are. And then there's a section here that wants you to know that your offer is not necessarily confidential in terms of the listing agent being able to disclose that to other buyers that they have your offer in hand. The next form here talks about fair housing and discrimination. There are many protected classes in California, so please take note of those. Fair housing prohibits discrimination on any of these protected classes in any sale or rental of housing. So if you feel like you've been discriminated on at any time during this process, please read through this, as well as if you are planning on becoming a landlord in the future, or when it comes time to sell your home in the future, please reference this document to ensure you're not inadvertently violating any fair housing laws. Okay, this next section here talks about wire fraud, which you have to know exists and is a real issue. So please take proper precautions in order to protect yourself against it. Essentially, what's going to happen when we're in escrow is that a lot of different parties are going to be reaching out to you, asking for all sorts of things. One of those parties being escrow, requesting the wire for your initial deposit and then later your down payment. So this is actually a pretty easy thing to protect against. All we're going to do is once you get the emailed wire instructions from escrow, we're going to look at the signature in the bottom, which is going to have their office details and their phone number. And we're going to just give that escrow officer a call and verify wire instructions. That's all. And that's kind of what it says right here. Okay, so obtain phone numbers and account numbers only from the escrow officer. Very important, because this is never, ever going to come from me or your lender. And that's what people have done in the past, is impersonate some of the parties involved. All right, here we are at the California Residential Purchase Agreement and joint escrow instructions. So a few things right off the bat, you'll see that this is a standardized state-approved contract. A lot of it is fill in the blanks. So all of the terms and conditions that you'd like to offer to the seller are going to be in the first couple pages. One thing to note is that this contract really favors you as a buyer. There are many, many protections written in here that protect you, right? So we'll go over those. Those are going to be in the form of contingencies. Now, because we are in one of the most competitive markets in the country, you'll often hear that a lot of these contingencies are waived. So I'll be going over kind of what that means and some of the terms that you're going to be able to choose between, depending on how strong you want your offer to be and how competitive you want your offer to be. Now, of course, it's all going to depend on competition, right? And at the time that I'm making this video, the market has softened quite a bit, which is great for you as a buyer, because we're finally, for the first time in many years, starting to see contingencies being accepted by the sellers. So first and foremost, let me make sure that the name that you provided me is the same as it's stated on your IDs. Here you'll see who are the agents involved in this transaction. Now here are going to be all of the financing terms. So the purchase price is something that you're going to determine after reviewing the comp analysis that I prepared for you, which shows all of the comparable sales. That should give you a good indication of where you think this property is going to appraise at, right? If there's other buyers in the picture, like I said, you may consider offering more than you normally would if there were no buyers in the picture. So it all depends. Close of escrow, this is typically 30 days, that's standard. But you may come across an instance where the seller needs more time to move out. Maybe you need more time to move out. You know, it depends on the situation. So you might consider a 45-day close. Or let's say the seller moved out already and the home is vacant, and having a quicker close that works for you would be just as well. Okay. One thing to note here is that we want to make sure that you are going to be in town the week prior to close in order for you to sign all of the loan documents, which needs to be notarized. So we're going to work on exactly when it's going to be the best day to close. Also, we don't normally close on Saturday or Sundays. So if that 30 days falls on a Saturday, you may need to decide if Friday or Monday works best. Okay, expiration of offer. This offer will expire within 3 calendar days unless there's a situation where I recommend that we shorten that to 24 hours. That's a part of the offer strategy that we'll put together. Initial deposit amount. This is typically 3%. That's the maximum amount of deposit that you could put in escrow. So, let's say $1 million here as an example. So in this case, it would be $30,000. Now, this is what's applied towards your down payment at closing. Okay. And this is due within 3 business days after acceptance. Sometimes the seller may try to shorten this to 1 or 2 days. You're not normally going to be asked for an increased deposit, so we'll skip that. Loan amount, let's say you're putting down 20%. And this part here, not to exceed a certain rate, right? So if this goes over a rate that you're not going to be comfortable with anymore in terms of the monthly payment, then this is going to allow you to cancel the contract based on this contingency. So let's say, for example, rates are 7%. We want to put 8%. Say, okay, you're not going to be comfortable with that monthly payment if it goes over 8. And then very important that we just specify what type of financing that you will be using. And you'll see here that 20% down payment minus the $30,000 comes out to $170K, and that's going to be due before closing to escrow. Seller credits, if we're able to negotiate that, will be entered here. Now, just note that your lender is going to have a cap on the amount of seller credits that they will allow. Okay. It's usually capped at the amount of closing costs that you pay. All right, now you'll see that these items are going to be attached to the offer. We don't typically wait the 3 days after acceptance to provide this to the seller. So this is going to be your pre-approval letter or your bank statements showing that all cash if you're doing that, and your down payment and closing costs. So bank statements and pre-approval. Now you'll see that there are different types of pre-approvals that you could have. The strongest one being the fully underwritten pre-approval and the weakest being the pre-qualification. So highly recommend, this is an easy way to strengthen your offer, is to just work with your lender and getting a fully underwritten pre-approval. That means all of the documents that you would normally submit during escrow once it opens have already been submitted to the lender beforehand. And they are confident in giving you a loan approval. This actually helps us, like I mentioned, to shorten that closing time if you wanted to, but also it allows you to comfortably waive this loan contingency. Right? That loan contingency is there because the 17 days usually gives you enough time to shop for financing, get that pre-approval in order, get the loan, all those documents to the lender in order for them to give you an approval. So if you've already done that, then, and of course we're going to get the lender's okay to do so, but you could waive that contingency. And that's very, very low risk, easy to do. Now there might be instances where you're buying into an HOA and they need condo approval. Then in that case, to protect you in case that condo doesn't get approved, we would write in a contingency there for however long the lender needs. Okay. Final verification of condition. This happens anywhere from 5 days up to the day before close, just to make sure that the home is in the same condition as you wrote the offer on. So no pipes have bursted, cabinets and appliances are still there, everything looks good. Appraisal contingency. So this is going to be something that your lender is going to require as a condition of your loan, right? They're going to hire an appraiser to do an appraisal for the property and make sure that it is worth the amount that you are purchasing it for. So for this example, this contingency, if you were to have it in place, would be if the appraisal came in below the $1 million. If that were the case, let's say it came in at $950, you would have the ability to renegotiate the price with the seller. And if there is no agreement to be made, then you could back out of the contract penalty free. Now, what's happening a lot of times is that buyers are choosing to waive this appraisal to make their offers more competitive. Now, if that's the case, then what you're essentially doing is agreeing to pay that appraisal gap. So in that example, that $50K upfront. Now, something that they added to this contract, which is really great, is they added this little section here. So instead of having just like an open wallet for whatever appraisal gap that might be, you're saying, if it comes in, I'm not really comfortable with $950 or anything that's unspecified, but if it comes in at $975, I would be okay with covering that $25K up to $1 million, right? So that's really, really great that they added that. That wasn't there before. So that's a good in between. Now, appraisals usually take 7 days to get in if you were to keep that appraisal contingency. Okay, so the next one is going to be your inspection contingency, right? Investigation of property. What this contingency does is it allows you to inspect the home so that you could be sure of the condition of the home, all of the repairs and maintenance needed, right? Any issues with the home you know about, and you can decide if it's something that you want to move forward with. So this is going to include the general home inspection, a termite inspection, and any other recommended inspections based on that general home inspection. So they could say that the roof needs further evaluation, plumbing, electrical, right? There's a lot of components of the home that could be inspected. And what this allows you to do is if you find a big issue that is going to be a deal breaker for you in regards to moving forward with the home, then you could negotiate with the seller to either repair that item, provide a credit to you so that you could fix the item at your own time, or reduce the sales price, right? And if no agreement could be made, if the seller refuses to do any of those things, then you could back out of the contract penalty free. Now, essentially what this contingency has become is a free look period, right, in California, because you don't have to give any specific reason to back out of the contract during this time. You could literally say that, you just changed your mind based on some of the inspections that you've come across, right? There could be an instance where at the during the inspection period, you're still shopping for other homes and you see one that you really, really like better. You could cancel this contract based on this contingency and go purchase that home. And so for that reason, this is a contingency that most sellers want to reduce or remove. And the way that they've been able to do that in this market in particular, this is a unique market in that we're a full disclosure market, meaning the seller has taken it upon themselves to conduct all of these inspections beforehand so that they could provide the buyer exactly the condition of this home, all of the material facts that affect this home, right? All of the issues that is actually going to be disclosed to you upfront before you decide to write an offer on the home. And by doing so, that enables most buyers to comfortably waive this inspection contingency, right? Because the purpose of this contingency is to inspect the home and see what the condition is. A few things about that, right? So one, because this is going to be the most important contingency to try to keep for a number of reasons, right? This benefits you, the buyer, the most because you have the most flexibility in terms of pulling out of the deal here, right? Because it could be for any reason that you pull out. And on the flip side, the seller, this is going to be the contingency that the seller wants waived the most, right? So in the event that you're going to be forced to remove this contingency or write out a no contingent offer, a few things. As a buyer, it's still recommended that you do your own inspections, right? Even though the seller has provided these inspection reports to you. Because if you find something that wasn't disclosed to you in the inspections that the seller did, you now have a new contingency. It's going to be the seller disclosure contingency. And you're going to be able to, again, either ask the seller for repair, credit, price reduction, or you could back out. So for example, let's say the seller did the general home inspection only, but that inspector recommended that you look into a few other things. Like let's say they wanted you to look into the electrical system a little more to see if it was up to code, and they had some questions about it, right? So as the buyer, you decide to look into the electrical panel further by hiring a licensed electrician. And the electrician finds that the panel needs to be upgraded, or maybe there's just the bad wiring, whatever the case may be, that's going to cost thousands of dollars that you wouldn't have offered the same amount of money or even written the offer if you had known that. And so that's a material fact that the seller did not disclose to you. And so in that case, you would be able to back out of the contract, right? So even if you opt to do a no contingent offer, you'll see how this offer and this purchase contract is still written to protect you in the event that you're buying something that you don't know what the condition of the home is that you're buying, right? So let's say you're buying a home at the time I'm making this video, March 2023, which is an amazing time to be a buyer because the market has shifted so much that we have been able to write in contingencies again because there are no other buyers competing against you. So in that case, let's say it's going to take us 7 days, right? Maybe 10 days if it's a single family home. Those require more inspections, about somewhere between 7 to 10 inspections for single family homes. For condos, maybe 1 to 3, 1 to 4, right? So the general home inspection, the seller usually pays for termite. You may want to do a mold inspection. That would be something. If it's an old condo, you might want to do an asbestos inspection. So those are all like internal inspections because HOA takes care of all of the structural components, which is why single family homes will require you to inspect the structure. Okay. Additionally, seller disclosures and reports. So again, in our market, these are all usually provided to you upfront before you submit an offer. But if there was a document somewhere in there that was missing, so here in this contract, you'll see all of the seller's contractual obligations to provide you certain documents. And that's actually going to be right here, sorry, number 11. Okay. So you can see that number 11, where all of the disclosures that the seller will be providing to you, if they haven't done so already, are listed here. Okay, so if any of those are missing, then you would have 7 days or whatever time we put here, or 5 days after you receive it, whichever one is later. Okay, so just to insert a quick note about the removal of contingencies. This can be found in section 14F of this contract, which says that by removing your contingencies, whether it's at the time of writing and you submit a non-contingent offer, or if there's contingencies in the offer and you remove them during escrow, by removing them, you are agreeing to move forward with the transaction. Okay, what you're saying by removing those contingencies is that you've completed all of your investigations, reviewed all of the reports and disclosures, and now you are contractually agreeing to move forward to the close. So breach of contract will happen anytime you decide to cancel the contract outside of these contingency periods. Okay, so if you remove the contingencies and then later change your mind, maybe you saw another home that you like better and you really have to have that one instead of this one, and you were willing to forfeit your deposit in order to get to that other home, you're saying, okay, my deposit is now going to be at risk if I cancel this contract, right? Because now I'm breaching it because I'm going against what I contractually agreed to. That's when your earnest money deposit, so up to that 3% of the sales price, will be at risk to be forfeited to the seller for liquidated damages. And so that's the part of the contract that I want to direct you to next, is going to be the liquidated damages clause here. So this is essentially having both parties, buyer and seller, agree to the amount of liquidated damages, which in this case is no more than 3% of the purchase price. Now, this is good because you have certainty in that this isn't going to go over 3% if it came down to a judicial decision or arbitration, right? This is something that you have to decide on whether or not you want to agree to that, and then the seller is going to agree to that as well as if you want to go through arbitration to resolve any disputes. Okay, so please read through this. Again, both parties need to agree to this if that's how you want to resolve any disputes in terms of the deposit, right? What damages are actually owed to the seller, if there are any, and that could be disputed in itself. So it's not necessarily that it's always going to be the 3%, but it's going to be up to the 3%. And you'll have to prove your case that, the home was only on the market for such a short period of time. We're also in a down market, and so not many damages are due to the seller, and for that reason, you only owe, 1%, 2%. In a competitive market, however, the seller could claim my home would have appreciated, X amount in the time that it was in escrow with this buyer, and I would have had, had 5 other buyers in line who wanted this home, and now I am due that 3%, and they probably may even try to fight for more. And so that's why they want you to agree to these numbers and these dispute resolutions up front. All right, so if you have a property that you need to sell and you'd like to make this contingent on that selling, then we can attach that contingency here. Now, possession. This is when you get keys in hand. This can happen anytime the day of close. So once it records, you get keys, or to make things easier, since we don't know when that could be, we could check 6 p.m., which it can't happen any later than that because that's when their office closes. Okay, seller occupied or vacant units. If you need to offer the seller a rent back in order to win this home. So if you're competing against other buyers, this is something that you can consider offering if the seller needs it. Essentially what you're saying is that you're agreeing to lease this property back to the seller. So now you're the landlord, they're the tenant, for a certain amount of days to allow them to move out of their home, maybe buy another home, things like that. I would only recommend doing this if you're in a very competitive situation and if this were going to be the make or break term. And if we had to do that, we would draft a residential lease agreement for you to make sure that you are fully protected as the new landlord, okay? Because now you will be subject to tenant-landlord laws. This is if you're buying an income property with tenants in place. These are the documents and the timelines that the seller has to get these documents over to you. Now, most likely these have already been provided to you in the disclosure packet. Okay, this is the section where we're going to write in all of the items that you want conveyed with the sale. Okay, so per the contract, any fixtures are already automatically included in the sale. So anything that's attached to the property. But for appliances, you can go and we're going to have to name or check all of the things that you want included in the sale. There might be an instance where you say you don't want the washer and dryer because they're so old and you're going to have to go through the trouble of removing them, right? So we could exclude that from the sale here. There might also be an instance where you want to add an additional item. Let's say you really like their dining table, right? And it's kind of a pain to move if it's a big dining table. Just remember that the seller still needs to agree to these terms. So we could try to negotiate that item in and see what they say. On the flip side, the seller could also say, I really want to keep my fridge because I just bought it and I want to bring it to my new house. So I'm not going to be including that in the sale. And the chandelier is a family heirloom, so we don't want to sell it either. So all of those will be discussed as we're putting this offer together. One thing to note is if you notice wall mounts present in the home, you could either have the seller leave them on, right? Or if you elect to have them remove them, contractually, the seller is contractually obligated to patch the wall, but not to paint over it. Just so you know, that's written in the contract here somewhere. All right, here's who pays for what, the allocation of costs. Now, this is going to vary depending on the county that you're buying in, as well as the market that you're buying in, right? Traditionally, the seller is the one who fronts a lot of these costs as well as the commissions, because it kind of evens out to where, you have your closing costs and down payment, as a buyer. And then so the seller in turn takes on a lot of the other costs. Because certain markets are more competitive than others, as I've mentioned many times before, a lot of what happens is that the buyer elects to pay certain fees in order to help their offer stand out. And so that's where you start to get those different customs for who pays for what. So certain counties you may encounter as a buyer that you're actually paying all of the escrow fees because that's just what's been customary in that area. But of course, it depends on the market. And so if we can get away with the seller paying for the majority of these items, then that's going to be obviously the best thing for you. Escrow fee and title fee, these are going to be the most significant of all of these. So usually we want each party to pay their own fees, right? You pay your fee, seller will pay theirs. Escrow and title are chosen by the seller. That is just the standard, usually because before they list their home, they need to already choose an escrow company to help them prepare the preliminary title report, the NHD report, things like that. But just so you know, you are entitled to choose your own title company, right? If you wanted to do so, we would negotiate that here. Okay, you have the right to do that as a buyer. Okay, so we'll skip over these. These are, again, going to vary, but we will try to ask for the first year's home warranty. Okay, this is going to be your choice as to what coverage you want, what company you choose. They're all going to have different policies and coverages. And depending on the size of the home, we're going to put in a reasonable amount here. Okay. So during escrow, you're going to decide on which company you think is going to be the best one, and I can help give you more information on that. Okay, the next part of this contract that I want to go over with you are your cancellation rights, and this can be found in section 14. Now, I've said this many times during the video, but I want to direct you to the specific language which addresses this part of the contract. So as you see here, buyer can perform any investigations, review all disclosures, reports. Within your contingency period, if we have one, you can request for the seller to make any repairs. But it also says that the seller is not contractually obligated to respond to your repair request. And so number 3 here says that by the time that your contingency period is due to be removed, you can either deliver to the seller that removal of the contingency or cancel the agreement, okay, regardless of if we've been able to negotiate any repair credits, right? Because homes are sold as is in California. So if we're able to get the seller to repair certain items, that's great. If not, then just know that that's not something that they're obligated to do. It's really going to depend on the situation again. Now I want to go down to how you get your deposit back. Right? So if you've acted in good faith up to this point, meaning you've canceled within any of those contingency periods, you can get your deposit back, right? Now, this just says that the buyer and seller need to both give written notice to escrow to cancel the agreement and also release a deposit. And that's because escrow is just the third party and they do what both parties say, right? So there are some instances where the seller has become difficult when it comes time to cancel the contract because maybe they're upset that you're canceling and they refuse to sign, right? That could very well happen. And so this part of the contract does address that. If a party refuses to sign and there is no good faith dispute, right? So there's no reason why they would refuse that if you've acted in good faith, then they could be subject to a penalty of up to $1,000. Okay. Now, as far as seller rights, go to cancel, they essentially have very little recourse to cancel this agreement if you fulfill all of your contractual obligations, okay? And that's one of the reasons why when it comes to deciding to accept an offer, the seller wants to take every precaution to choose the right buyer. Because once they accept your offer, they are legally bound to sell you the home no matter what. And if the deal falls apart for any number of the reasons, for financing, appraisal, inspection, then they've chosen the wrong buyer, right? And they have to go back on the market and find another buyer. And so really the only way a seller can get out of this deal is, as I said, if you don't meet your contractual obligations, and those are all outlined here. So you'll see deposit funds, right, as required by paragraph 3D1, which if you remember, you need to deposit within 3 business days or whatever we negotiated. You need to give your lender's contact info, you need to meet all of the deadlines and timelines and removal of contingencies, all of that. Now, if you're late to do any of these things, then the seller can't just cancel outright. What they have to do is serve you a notice to perform. So notice to buyer to perform, which gives you 2 days. Here it is. Gives the other party at least 2 days after it's been delivered to you to take the applicable action. So if you are late to remove your inspection contingency, then the seller on day 7 is going to give you this notice to perform. And essentially what that means is you have to remove your contingency by day 9. Either remove it or cancel the contract and get your deposit back. Okay. So there have been many instances where the seller accepts an offer and then another buyer comes in once they're in escrow and offers the seller significantly more money. Okay, I've seen it happen where the seller was offered $100K more than what they were in contract for. And that seller really wanted, obviously, to get out of their current deal and go with the higher offer. And so they did everything they could to try to get out of the contract, which was, in this case, to give the notice to perform to the buyer for every single deadline that was written in that contract. And you'll see here that if they really want to be aggressive about it, it cannot be delivered any earlier than 2 days prior. So in that instance, if the seller wants to get out of the contract, if your contingency period ends on day 7, for example, they will serve you a notice to perform on day 5, right? That's as soon as they can serve it to you. To make sure that you remove it on day 7. And then they're going to cross their fingers and hope that you are not ready to remove it and then cancel the contract. So in that case that I just mentioned, they were not able to get out of the contract and they were forced to sell the home to the buyer who paid $100K less. Okay, now that we have covered some of the important parts, including the contingency removal and cancellation rights, I'm just going to go over this document and point out some other important parts of it. Okay, this part here, this is where it says that all properties are delivered as is. Okay, that the seller is not obligated to make any repairs, but upon closing, they are supposed to give you the property free of any personal items and debris. Okay, this is the part that talks about all of the contingencies that are built into this contract, right? I want to point out here that as part of your loan, you are going to be required to obtain home insurance. And if you are in a high fire zone or high flood zone, your lender might also require that you get flood or fire insurance. And so those are things that you have to investigate as soon as possible, right? Either during your contingency period, if you have one, or before we write the offer and submit it. They added this part here because what people are doing was waiving one or the other of these contingencies and then using the other to cancel. So for example, a lot of people were waiving the appraisal contingency, but keeping the loan contingency. And when the appraisal came in low, they would just cancel based on the loan contingency. So they did have to write in this new clause when they last revised this contract. Right. So the reason that you cancel this contract is going to become important, right, based on the contingency that you're canceling with. Okay, title, the seller and the escrow company are going to help make sure that the seller delivers the title to you free and clear, right? And that's through this preliminary title report. And then they're also going to be paying for the title insurance. Okay. Again, this is stated here. Again, removal of contingencies. We already went through that. Items included and excluded from the sale, if you want to read more about that. Who pays for what? Allocation of costs is going to be over here. Oh, okay. So number 11, actually, these are all of the disclosures. I think I probably mentioned this earlier already, but this is everything that you can expect the seller to be providing to you. Now, the real estate transfer disclosure statement is probably going to be one of the more important documents for you to inspect. Okay, that's a seller disclosure. Basically, it's a questionnaire, and it's going to be the seller filling out every known material fact that affects the value of that property. Okay, so that's where they're going to write if there's any neighborhood nuisances, what repairs they've done, things like that. Okay. Also, so these are all the standard California disclosures, but here's one that you definitely want to look into, is the Megan's Law. So if you go to this website, you can check for any registered sex offenders in your area and make sure that you're not living next to one, right? If that were to be a deal breaker for you, you'd probably want to know that right off the bat. Okay. So that's a quick note on disclosures. Condo, if you have an HOA, these are all the forms that you can expect to review. So you're going to have all of their financial statements, right? You're going to have information on how much reserves they have and what maintenance is due in the next 5-10 years, and if they have enough money to pay for that. Any special assessments that are upcoming or in place, you'll know about that. HOA meeting minutes. This is a recording of everything that they're going over in those meetings. And of course, any restrictions, right? That's the most important part. Okay, this is a section that talks about your buyer's investigation. And they also go into depth about this in the last advisory here, which is going to be one of the last few pages. The buyer's investigation advisory, right? So multiple places here where they're going to be recommending you do certain inspections. Okay. All right. This is an important part. So again, like as I mentioned, the seller's contractual obligation is to deliver a title that is free and clear of any liens, right, or any encumbrances. So that part is addressed right here. Additionally, the way that you take title is going to have significant legal and tax consequences. Okay, so please make sure you're working with the escrow officer and probably your tax professional to see what's the best way for you to take title on this home. That is above my pay grade. I can't advise you on that. So please seek the correct professional advice. All right, and then you have already seen this. Cancellation rights, right? All right, this section here addresses repairs. So if we were to negotiate any repairs from the seller, this just states that the work needs to be in a good, skillful, quality manner. It doesn't necessarily require that a licensed professional do the repairs. So if that's something that you think is going to be necessary, given the type of repair, let's say maybe it's an electrical repair and you'd really like a licensed electrician to do that as opposed to just the seller, we would have to write that in separately. Okay, final verification of condition. This is when we're going to walk through the home again and just make sure everything is in the right condition. Okay, and then this just says that this is not a contingency of the sale. Okay, it's just solely to confirm that the property has been maintained. It's in the same condition as when you wrote the offer. All repairs have been completed as agreed, right? All right, so rest of this, you can read through this, prorations and property taxes, all of the taxes, HOA fees, assessments, all of that interest should be paid up to the close of escrow. Okay, there will be a supplemental tax bill that you will get for periods after the close of escrow and up to the point where the seller has paid the prorated taxes. Brokers and agents, just says seller or buyer to pay the broker commission. In this case, it's going to be the seller paying for commissions. Scope of duty as your agent. This just says that I can't guarantee the condition of the property, right? But I can help you figure out what the condition is. I can't guarantee the performance of any of the inspectors or the services. Identifying defects, that's going to be the inspector's job. Identifying, boundary lines or anything affecting title, that's going to be like escrow. Escrow and title's job, right? Determining the fair market value of the property, that's going to be the appraiser, and providing legal and tax advice, right? That's going to be reserved for your lawyer or CPA. All right, and then joint escrow instructions. So as I mentioned before, any changes to this contract or these instructions need to be approved and signed for by the buyer and seller. So if we need to change any of the terms, like the price, any of the timelines, things like that, or that, like I've mentioned, if both parties wanted to cancel, release a deposit. Okay, this is helpful to reference. This just gives you all of the definitions in here if you had any questions about anything. But of course, you can always ask me as well. And you saw this already. And so really the next step is to submit this offer, and the seller can either accept your offer. So you'll see that part here. They'll return this with signature. Hopefully that's the case, but 9 times out of 10, they're going to counter your offer. And they're going to say, we agree to certain terms, but we want to change these terms, whatever the case may be. And so I will let you know as soon as we get a response from the seller. But in the meantime, please go ahead and read through the rest of this document and let me know if you have any questions. Okay, I'll be in touch about the seller's response, and hopefully we'll be opening escrow soon.